pop up. Just randomly you'll need to use this tool or that tool, or something will go wrong and you need to do it manually or whatever. So I'm going to make a Polygon Sphere. And one of the things that happens in a Polygon Sphere is that sometimes we go to extrude stuff. So if I grab this and extrude it out, there it goes, and I pull this, you can see what happened is I accidentally pulled out the other side too. But let's pretend I was at a different angle and didn't see the other side getting pulled out. I do my work, I save it, I close it down, I come back the next time, and then I spin around and I realize, whoops, I accidentally did that, right? And that's obviously something we don't want to happen. So we definitely could delete the entire thing, rebuild it from scratch. This wouldn't be a huge thing to do for this object. But there's ways that we can work around it, especially when you get into a more complex shape. It becomes really, really necessary to be able to do that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is delete the faces that I don't want there, and I'm going to re-put the faces back in. Okay? So there's two ways that we could do this. One of the ways to do this is I'm going to use the Append to Polygon tool. And with this, I can click on just an edge. And when I click on an edge, you'll see that the edge I clicked got highlighted in green. And then we have these like pink arrows, right? You can see the pink arrow right here, or triangle. That arrow is specifying a direction. So even though it doesn't make sense to us that it has a direction, there is a direction, and we have to follow that direction. So I'm going to go to the next arrow, go to the next arrow, go to the next arrow, and then I'm just continuing in this direction just to create this looping. Okay. Now the last one it usually does for you, so you don't have to click the very last edge. So then we hit enter. All right. So now that patches it up. So now we have a closing right here. Now if I were to hit 3, you see I get some weird funky distortion in that area. That spot is where we don't have a quad. When we don't have quads, it doesn't smooth nice, and so we get this funky stuff happening.
I don't like. There still is that's still a quad though. How is that not a quad?
If I go to the edges, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. So a quad is a 4-sided, right? And here we have 10 sides going around. All right. So what I need to do is then insert edges. So I'm going to use the multi-cut, and the multi-cut I click on one corner, and then I can click on the opposite corner and then hit enter, and it'll add that edge in there. Click here, click there, enter, click here, and there we go. So now when I hit 3, we get a nice smooth transition throughout.
So much easier than edge loop.
Well, the problem with edge loop is that edge loop, let's say I deleted this edge here, and then I go to inserting an edge loop. The edge loop won't go past that because, again, it's not a quad. It doesn't understand that. Now, the thing I don't like about the multi-cut, let me go back to multi-cut just to patch this back in, is let's say I needed to edge loop all the way around. And if I'm using multi-cut, this process can take forever.
You can just like double click?
No. Because multi-cut is basically you're routing it, right? You're telling it this is where I want you to go.
Oh.
Okay? That's why it's used for that kind of thing where we're just kind of repairing something or patching it in. Sometimes when we get into our character stuff, that's going to be our last assignment, we will use the multi-cut to kind of direct the edges around. So that'll be really important to use that. All right. So I'm going to do this too. I'm going to grab these edges and I'm just going to hit the delete key, and then I'm going to hit 3. Now, I hit the delete key. These here are no longer quads, right? Because there's 5 sides there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But if you look here as I hover my mouse over those edges, there's actually 2 edges there. Even though we deleted the edge, it still considers it an edge. If I go to vertex, you'll see that there's this edge kind of floating out in space. Not really out in space. What was that?
Why does it do that?
Because when I deleted the edge, I just hit the regular delete. Okay, if I hit regular delete, it just deletes the edge. It doesn't delete the vertices. So I have to hit Control Delete, and that deletes my vertices, allowing me not to have vertices there. Okay. So in some cases, I may do this. I may cut it like that, and then I may go to my multi-cut, and then I may like reroute this way. I don't know why I would reroute this one this way, but you know, just for the sake of the lecture, that's what I'm doing. Okay, so that's where we can create some cool stuff, because we can delete edges and reroute these things to go certain ways to get different shapes. Like I could then take this and extrude that out, and then pull this, pull that. There we go. So now we have this kind of like diamond-y shape kind of popping out the top. And then when we hit 3 to smooth it, it's fancy.
Pretty teardrop.
Yeah. Okay, so it definitely has its purpose in using that. The other tools that are kind of important, let's delete that. Let's make a cube. Let's put a bevel on this. All right. So here's my bevel. Now let's pretend again we've saved our work, we've closed it down, we've come back tomorrow, and then we realize we still want to do other work to this, okay? Like if I go and want to extrude this face and then put a bevel here, it's not going to look good, okay? It's going to actually transition pretty weird into that, especially if I start adding extra divisions. You can really see how funky that transition is happening, okay? So what might make more sense is if I got rid of the bevel and then re-extruded it and then redid all of my beveling after I've done that extrusion. All right. So one tool I can use for this is merging. Okay. So what it's going to do is it's going to find all the vertices that are within a set distance. If I go to the option box, there's the distance. So it's going to say grab any vertice, look in that distance for any other vertices. If you find them, just merge them together. Okay. So if I set this to 0.01 and hit merge, you'll see that nothing happens because 0.01 is a pretty small unit. So if I go to the merge options and I set this to like 0.1, you'll see how it then merges all those bevels back together. So now we're back to where we were, okay? Now we do have these weird black shapes happening here, all right? Let me create a sphere that's a little bit more apparent on a sphere. So if I deselect the sphere, it looks pretty round. There's some spots where it looks kind of faceted, but for the most part, it looks round. Under the mesh display, this is where we went before, where we could reverse it and make the normals face in, so it looks black. Or mesh display, reverse it again, the normals are facing out, it looks white. There's also an option here to harden my edges. So when I harden the edges, you can see what it looks like. It more looks like a disco ball now. So it looks all faceted, right? So a long time ago when they created the first Polygon games, this is what they had. There was basically, here's a face, and that's what you're going to see. Over time, they found a way to take these two faces and then soften that transition, okay? So it just looks like it blends nicely together. So that is the one below it, which is this soften edge. And so that's what that's going to do. Now on this one, what happens is when we merge it, it's trying to keep the soften edge, but this shape is too blocky to create a softened edge. So if I go up here and I just harden this, we'll get it back to being an actual square. It had, none of the geometry's changed, it's just how it's appearing has changed. So now what I'm going to do is go to face, I'm going to extrude it, maybe I'll pull it down a little bit, extrude it again, pull it out, and then I can go through and do my bevel on the entire thing and have a nice smooth transition from one spot to the next spot without having to worry about how they're going to flow, okay? So again, this is something that I use countless times because you're always going to be merging vertices, okay? Here's another example. If we went to the cylinder, sure. And I'm going to take the caps off of this. And let's say I did like we were doing before. We were mirroring stuff, right? So we would delete half of this. We would work on this half, so I'll just insert some edge loops. I'll grab a couple faces. I'll extrude it out. Gorgeous. There we go. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to mirror this whole shape over. Okay. So under mesh, we go to mirror geometry. We pick the direction. This is going to be in the -z. I say merge, and there we go. It worked perfectly. Okay. 90% of the time, it's going to work perfectly. Let me rephrase that. 70% of the time, it's going to work perfectly. And that number drops the further we get into the semester. Okay. Sometimes what happens is you'll have a gap. There will be like a small space between them. And I'll show you why you get it. If I go to these edges here, and I just nudge them just ever so slightly away from that center point, and then we go back to mirroring the geometry, look what it did there. It just went like in the totally opposite direction that we wanted. Like, why does it do that? Who knows? Just Maya. Now, one thing we can do is we can go over here to the mirroring options, and I can set my pivot Z to 0. Okay, and that'll at least move it over there so it's in the right spot, but you'll see that these edges are still not connected. So in this case, I could go through and just grab these two, and I can merge them together. So merge, merge, merge. Now their distance is not 0.01 away from each other, but because I only have two selected, it automatically merges those two. Yes, ma'am.
Is it because when you deleted that first half, it was farther away from the second half when you deleted it?
No, because I grabbed the edge and just nudged it over. Because it's mirroring it on that center line, so if I move it away from the center line, it's going to flip it over to that other side. Okay? So I can just go through and mirror these. Yes, sir?
What was the merge key?
When you go to anything in Maya, like merge, the hotkey to redo that same command is just G. Okay, so I'm just hitting G again, G again, G again.
You have to do one at a time?
You don't have to do one at a time. Okay, so that was the next thing. Let's undo all that. There we go. Now let's grab all of these. Now they have to be within a certain distance. If I were to try to go to merge and crank up that value until those connected, somewhere else on the model I could connect stuff I don't want to connect. So I always like to have as much control over that as I can. So I go to my scale and I grab the scale and just scale these together. So now they're touching, they're on top of each other, and then I can go to merge, and now they should be within that distance and they merge together and everyone's happy. Okay? Now the other tool, because obviously we got rid of the top of this, now we need to put that back on. There's another tool we can use to close stuff off, and it's called fill hole. There he is. So you click fill hole, and it does it. So instead of hitting append and going all the way around that entire edge, fill hole is a great way just to kind of fill in those spots. There it is, and there it is. Cool. Now, because I did that, if I were to hit 3, you'll see I get some funky stuff happening here. So I get this because we're transitioning from these verticals to this flat plane, and that transition of going from 20 divisions around to 0 divisions up top, it just creates this mess. So one way we've already kind of seen to fix that is if I go and grab the faces and I just do bevels on them. So low bevels like that, and now I hit 3, and we'll see that we get no weird behavior on it. Now, if I wanted that to be more rounded, so it's not like crisp, all I have to do is undo the bevels. There we go. And I'll just grab these two. I'm going to extrude them, and I'm going to take their offset in. And what did I do there? Oops. I did. All right. So extrude that again. Come on. And then I can pull this up a bit, and then I could put bevels on top of this, and that will help transition that so I have a nice smooth rounding bit on top of it. Now it's still a little bit pokey. You can kind of see it on here where it looks like there's a star just ever so faint. Now that ever so faint star here, if we were to add reflection to this, that would just like shine. We would definitely see that like crazy. Anytime you do something like this, you need to make sure you have at least 2 divisions holding that top shape together. Okay? So now that definitely looks a lot better. It's still kind of there. The other thing we can do is grab these 2 faces and just extrude them and just push it in a little bit. Okay? It needs to have some sort of flatness or some sort of edges, like 2 edges together on the top, in order for that not to poke and not to pinch. And then I could tweak it from there, just grabbing this, and then scaling that in. Okay?
Is there ever a way to get 100% get rid of it?
No, there's never a way to get 100% rid of it. There's other things we can do, like this isn't a perfect situation, but like I can actually grab a cube, and if I smooth the cube out, mesh and smooth, it actually creates a quadded cube, so that way I don't really have it. So I could build it off of there. The only issue with it is that it's not a perfectly round sphere. It's actually kind of like a little bit blockier sphere. So you can get away with doing something like that for sure. The other thing I can do is take this point here and take this point there and go to Edit Mesh and say poke. And that'll put all those divisions back in there. Okay? And that'll help as well kind of transition that into a nice smooth surface too. Okay, it's always going to be something you'll fight against, just how it works. but it is what it is. Okay. Here's a couple other cool tools. And some of these are very specific to a project. Like, I don't use these all the time, but I want you to see them because when you get to that spot where you're like, I wish I knew how to do this, hopefully you'll remember this. So I'm going to go right click, and instead of going to face or vertex or edge, I'm going to go to multi. Multi allows you to select multiple components, faces, edges, and vertices at the same time. Okay? So I'm going to grab this face, I'm going to shift click this edge, and under edit mesh, I'm going to go down to here. Now notice when you're looking at this menu, these are kind of separated in a what they apply to: curves, faces, edges, vertex, and components. So that way you can kind of see what it is that you need to select in order for this to work. So this is wedge. So I click wedge, and look what it created. This little rounding shape right here. So if I'm doing something construction, industrial, I need a bunch of vents. This is a perfect way to do that. So I grab the face. I'm going to extrude it just to pull it out. Whoops, just to pull it out of it. There we go. And then I go back to that multi, and I pick the face, and then I shift click the direction I want that wedge to go into. So I want it to go to the right, so I click this right edge. I go back to here, I go back to wedge, and there it is. And then I can grab that face again, extrude it, and pull it out. Yeah. All right, so wedge is definitely a cool tool. Poke I'll use a lot too. Here's another one that's kind of handy. We have an item, just like this random item, and what I want to do is I want to create something that's going to line up perfectly with that edge. Okay, I'm going to create a brace that needs to fit perfectly on there. So I'm going to grab these faces here. Let's say I grab those faces. I'm going to go to edit mesh, and I'm going to duplicate those faces. And what that does is it takes the faces I've selected and makes a brand new object of just those faces. So now I can go back to object mode, click off of it, and it's kind of hard to select because they're on top of each other, so I always just kind of like select it and then shift marquee to deselect and reselect. So there I have the faces. Now I could extrude it and give it some thickness. And now I could extrude, let's say, these two here, extrude that, push it in. Go, extrude it again, push it down, and then I'll flatten this out. So now I have this that lines up perfectly with that sphere. Now you try to do that any other way, it's going to be very difficult for you to line up those faces exact, especially when you get into something where you have, you know, a lot of faces going on. Now take this entire example of duplicating faces for the support. That's how you would create clothes, right? You have your character like this that you've modeled. You grab all the faces where you want the clothes to be, duplicate them, and you just extrude it out, and now you have clothes. If you want hair, you grab where the hair would be, duplicate the faces, extrude it out, and now you can add different divisions to the hair.
So are those separate components?
Yeah, it's a separate object.
Okay.
So it's all by itself. So yeah, so it's pretty awesome using those tools. There's a bunch of other stuff inside here too. I think we used bridge before, like when we did our chair, just to kind of refresh your memory on bridge, because it is like a really, really helpful tool. I'll show you an example. Someone was doing this yesterday. So they have a cylinder. Let me just delete that stuff. They have a cylinder, and what they want to do is they want to create these little legs that come out of the cylinder, and then there's a cap on top of it. Okay, so imagine that the cylinder just has like holes in it. So they played around with it for an hour, and I let you play with stuff. If I see you struggling with something, I want you to struggle. I want you to play with it, just so you can see that workflow. And then he says, okay, I give up. How do I do it? So I said, okay, let's play with several different ways we can do this. So one way is I take the cap off, and I extrude this in like that. That works. And I'm going to duplicate this and pull it up and just rotate it around like 180. Oh, that's the wrong direction. Oh, that was right there. There we go. Okay. And I'll just shrink this down to like that. So what I want to do is I'm going to just create a bridge. If I create a bridge between these faces and that faces, that's what he wanted to do. Now I can't just do it right now because there is no way to bridge between two separate objects, okay? So I have to combine these into one object, and then I can use bridge. So under mesh, I go to combine. There we go. Now I can grab this face, and then I can shift click that face, and then I can go to bridge. There he is. And I'm just going to set the options to 1 division or 0 divisions. And there we go. And then I can come over here and grab this face, grab that face, and do the same thing. And grab, how many did I go here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ooh. It worked out perfectly. There we go. So now, very quickly, I've created a shape like this. So using these tools on top of each other, this is where the power comes in, because it's just like a little trick. You can play with this for an hour trying to get it. You couldn't get it to work right. You added other shapes, trying to line them up, trying to get them in position. That didn't work. The other way I could have done it was just duplicating the faces and just extruding those faces up. The other way is just extruding it and letting it just sit inside here. But I think what he wanted to do was eventually smooth it out, so we had something like, not like that, but better. Like this. I'll just extrude this in, a little bit of offset. Another division here. There we go. And then I'll even take this and extrude this in. Or a well. Yeah. So he had this as his part of his drone. He had the propeller like inside this. It was obviously bigger and whatever else, but that was what he wanted to do for his specific setup. So you can't be afraid to just kind of go in there and play with the stuff just to see what it does. See how you can use these tools over and over and over again to combine other things. Another little trick is just using a plane. Bless you. So if I take a plane here and I want like a specific shape, like people will start off with a cube trying to build a specific shape, when realistically we can get away with using a plane and then just extruding it. So if I grabbed this and added less divisions, like 4, that should be good. And I just went through and just grabbed these and pushed this down, and push that down. I'm not really making anything specific, I'm just kind of creating something like that, okay? So I created this, now all I have to do is extrude and give it a little bit of thickness. And now I've created a shape that actually has thickness that looks exactly like I want it to look like, and I'm using very few divisions to create that initial shape. Start off very low resolution, build up to something very high resolution, okay? Here's another example. If I'm making like an ice cube, because if you make a product, you may want an ice cube for your drink or whatever. You start off with a couple divisions, like 2, 2, and 2, and maybe 4. 3. Okay, and I'm just going to go through and just grab individual points and just kind of move them around. And there's no specific shape to an ice cube, it's just kind of square, cubey. So I'm just kind of moving these around just to kind of give it an organic type shape. There we go. And this side here should be kind of moved a little bit like that. There we go. All right, so there's my ice cube. And then what I would do is I would try to smooth it out. And I'm going to take my divisions. Let me go back to my options for this. There's more options inside the attribute editor too. Like these ones are just kind of like the top 10 list. These ones have a lot more. So here I can change this to like a Maya, cat mole, whatever, and it actually allows me to, there it is, control the continuity of this. So instead of it being perfectly round, I can kind of go like halfway between it. Okay, so that way it still maintains some of the sharpness of it. All right, then I can hit 3, and then we have this kind of ice cube shape. Now, if I tried to go with a polygon, a cube that had that many divisions first, it wouldn't have looked as good because it would have looked really blocky. If I go in here, and I'm going to smooth this out again just so you can see it, and I start grabbing vertices and start pushing and pulling them, look how obvious the movement is here. It's not subtle. Okay? When I go to that really low resolution, start tweaking stuff, and then work in and start smoothing it, that's where it starts to become a little bit more realistic looking. All right, I think that was all I wanted to cover. Oh, one more offset. All right, so sometimes we have this. I want to put an edge loop right in the middle. So I click about the middle, and I'm going to put my weight to 0.5. So if I go to the options and set the weight to 0.5, it cuts it right into the middle of it. Now what I want to do is create an offset between these. I want to have 2 lines coming down. So if I go to my mesh tools and go to offset edge loop, I click and drag right on this. And now I can add 2 edge loops side by side, which is a pretty neat way to add some extra edge loops and have them be perfectly distanced apart. Okay? And I can even go here and add more, and there and add more if I needed to. Now the other thing that I can do is if I created another cube or sphere or cylinder or whatever. Oops. Let's say that I needed, I wanted to add some lights inside here. I just wanted kind of like a grid pattern of divisions. And instead of going to the insert edge loop and going like this, like that, which those are not obviously even, I'm going to go to my insert edge loop option box and say I want multiple edge loops. How many do I want? And I just click. And it automatically inserts them evenly throughout. Okay? So if you have something that you needed a bunch of divisions there, kids, bunch of divisions across it, evenly spaced, that's where you would use that tool. Just make sure you set this back to relative, otherwise you're going to be clicking and adding 6 divisions every time you click on something. Alright, and I believe that's it there, that's it there. Yep, that's all the ones I wanted to cover, okay? The rest of these will just kind of come up as they go. There's some like triangulate, quadrangulate you would use for very specific circumstances. I don't use it all the time. Things like booleans I don't use all the time. Never use booleans, especially at this level. We just don't want to use that. Yeah, cool. All right, so I'll put this up on the server so you can use this as reference for while you're working with stuff. You forget what a tool does, you can jump back in and check it out, okay? Any questions?